Story 1. In my small, quiet town where everyone knew each other, I, Watson, loved hosting dinner parties. I enjoyed bringing friends together for good food and conversation. It was a pleasant evening when I decided to host another gathering. Inviting my closest companions, I had no idea that this would turn into a mystery that still haunts me. I spent the day preparing. The table was set with my best dishes, and the house smelled of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow, my friends started to arrive. Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and John. With them was a new friend, Tom, who had recently moved to town. Tom was a bit of an enigma, quiet and reserved, but I thought it would be nice to include him. He seemed happy to be invited, and I hoped he would enjoy the evening. We all gathered around the table, sharing stories and laughter as we ate. The dinner progressed smoothly, with everyone enjoying the food and each other's company. After dessert, we moved to the living room. Tom remained unusually quiet, but I initially dismissed it, thinking he might just be shy or not yet comfortable. As the evening wore on, his mood visibly shifted. He became tense, irritable, barely speaking, and avoiding eye contact. I noticed but didn't want to draw attention to it. Eventually, he stood abruptly, muttering something about needing to leave. Before I could respond, he was out the door, slamming it behind him. We sat in stunned silence, unsure what had just occurred. After a few moments, we tried to brush it off, continuing the evening. Though the atmosphere had noticeably changed, the night eventually ended, and my friends said their goodbyes, still puzzled. The following day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I decided to check on Tom, hoping to understand what had upset him. I went to his house, but there was no answer. His car was in the driveway, yet it seemed empty. I left, thinking he just needed some space. Days turned into weeks, and still no word from Tom. I reached out to my friends, but no one had seen or heard from him. Concerned, I called the police and reported him missing. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate. Months passed, and Tom remained gone. The police had searched his home, interviewed neighbors, and followed every lead, but it was as if he had vanished completely. My friends and I were left with more questions than answers. One evening, I found myself replaying the events of that night. What had caused him to leave so suddenly? I couldn't help but feel responsible, wondering if I had missed a sign, or could have done something. Determined, I began looking into Tom's background. I discovered he had moved to our town after a difficult breakup, seeking a fresh start. He had few friends, and his family lived far away. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I truly knew him. Alone in my house one night, I heard a noise outside, a faint rustling, like someone moving through bushes. My heart raced as I peered out, but saw nothing. The noise stopped, and I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. Over subsequent nights, the noises continued. Footsteps, whispers, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. I felt constantly on edge, my sleep disturbed. I later found an old journal in Tom's house that the police had overlooked. It was filled with his thoughts, revealing a troubled mind. He wrote about feeling out of place, not just in our town, but in life itself. The entries grew darker, filled with paranoia and fear. The last entry was dated the evening of the dinner party. I can't escape it. It's always watching, always waiting. I need to leave before it's too late. Reading those words sent a profound chill through me. What had Tom been so terrified of? I shared the journal with the police, but it offered no concrete answers. Their investigation continued, but the trail went cold. As time passed, the memory faded for most, but I couldn't let it go. Haunted by the unknown, I often found myself staring into the darkness, listening for those faint noises, wondering if Tom was out there somewhere, lost and afraid. My friends tried to comfort me, but the mystery endured. Tom was gone, and we might never know what truly happened. The dinner party that had ended happily for the rest of us had left a permanent shadow over my life, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments can turn into the most inexplicable mysteries. In the quiet moments, alone with my thoughts, I still think of Tom and that fateful evening. The unanswered questions linger, a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. And so I continue to search for answers, hoping that one day the mystery will be solved and Tom's story will finally have an ending. Story 2. My son Alex was brought home late one evening by his friend James. Alex was a young adult then, having been out with friends. I was already in bed when I heard the front door open. I quickly got up to check. In the living room, I saw James struggling to support Alex, who was extremely intoxicated, barely able to stay. His clothes were disheveled, and his eyes were half closed. James, a tall, muscular young man, handled Alex's weight with ease. "Sorry about this," James said, his voice steady. Alex had a bit too much to drink. I nodded, my concern for my son overriding any frustration. "Let's get him to his room," I said, moving to help. Together we managed to get Alex upstairs and into his bed. He mumbled incoherently, his head lolling to the side. I pulled off his shoes and tucked him in, hoping he would sleep it off. James watched for a moment before turning to leave. "Thanks for bringing him home," I said, feeling relieved now that Alex was safe. "No problem," James replied with a small smile. "I'll check on him tomorrow." With that, James left, and I went back to my room. The next day, Alex was groggy, but otherwise fine. He didn't remember much, just being out with friends and drinking too much. Life went on as usual, and I didn't give that night another thought. Much later, everything changed. One evening, I was watching the news when a breaking story caught my attention. The reporter stood in front of a hotel, describing a horrific crime. My heart sank as I listened. "A young man was found deceased in his hotel room today," the reporter stated. "The victim, whose name has not been released, was reportedly checked into the hotel by a friend the previous night. Police are now searching for the friend, who is considered a suspect." A chill ran down my spine. Something about the story felt disturbingly familiar. I watched, horrified, as the reporter continued. "According to witnesses, the suspect was seen leaving the hotel early. Police have released this sketch of the suspect." The screen showed a drawing of a man who looked eerily like James. My heart pounded as I tried to process it. Could it be him? The thought was almost too much to bear. I immediately called Alex. He answered, his voice sleepy. "Alex, turn on the news," I said urgently. "There's something you need to see." Minutes later, he called back, his voice now fully awake and filled with shock. "What do we do?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "We need to call the police." We did just that, and soon detectives were at our house, asking questions about James. Alex told them everything he knew about the night James brought him home drunk, and how they had been friends for years. The detectives took notes, their faces serious. Days turned into weeks, as the search for James continued. The story dominated the news, and everyone in our small town discussed it. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. James had not only intoxicated his friend, but had also checked them into the hotel, only to kill them and escape. The brutality was unimaginable. Alex was deeply affected, unable to believe that his friend, someone he had trusted, could do something so terrible. He became withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room. I tried to comfort him, but no words could make the situation better. One evening, some weeks after the news broke, Alex and I sat in the living room. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock. Alex stared at the floor, lost in thought. "Mom," he finally said, breaking the silence, "do you think I could have done that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I didn't know what to say. The thought had crossed my mind too many times, a fear I tried to suppress. "I don't know, Alex," I said softly, "but you're safe now, and that's what matters." The police eventually located James. He had fled to a neighboring state, hiding in a rundown motel. His capture brought some relief, but the scars he left behind were deep. The trial was long and painful, with details of the crime emerging that were almost too much to bear. In the end, James was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but for Alex and me, life would never be the same. The fear and betrayal lingered, casting a shadow over our days. Alex struggled to move on, haunted by the knowledge that someone he had considered a friend was capable of such evil. Years have passed, but the memories remain. Alex has tried to rebuild his life, but there are moments when I still see the pain in his eyes, a reminder of the nightmare we lived through. The experience taught us both a hard lesson about trust and the darkness that can hide within people we think we know. We still talk about that night sometimes, the night James brought Alex home. It serves as a stark reminder of how close we came to losing everything. And though we've tried to move forward, the shadows of that time are never far behind. Story 3. My friends and I decided to go for a night drive. We were bored and wanted an adventure. It was a cold, clear evening, and the moonlight made the empty roads look mysterious. There were 4 of us in the car: myself, Alex, Sam, and Jenny. We drove aimlessly, laughing and playing music, but soon the conversation turned to ghost stories. Someone mentioned an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. We should go there, Sam suggested with a grin. The idea was thrilling and scary all at once. We all agreed, and Alex, who was driving, turned the car toward the house. The roads became narrower and bumpier as we got closer. Tall trees lined the path, their branches looking like twisted fingers in the moonlight. Finally, we saw it, the old abandoned house. It stood at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by overgrown bushes and tall grass. The house was large, with broken windows and a sagging roof. It looked like it had been empty for a very long time. The car's headlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the house look even more menacing. We parked the car a little way down the road, not wanting to draw attention. As we walked toward the house, the air felt colder, and I could hear our footsteps crunching on the gravel. My heart was beating fast, and I could tell my friends were nervous too. We reached the front door, which hung off its hinges. Alex pushed it open with a creak, and we stepped inside. The air inside was musty and stiff. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows on the dusty floor. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. We split up to explore. Jenny and I went upstairs, while Alex and Sam stayed on the ground floor. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed. Each step echoed through the empty house. Upstairs we found old furniture covered in white sheets, broken picture frames, and cobwebs in every corner. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jenny and I moved from room to room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. In one of the rooms, I found an old diary on a dusty table. I picked it up and opened it, but the pages were too faded to read. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from downstairs. My heart jumped into my throat. "Alex, Sam," Jenny called out, but there was no answer. We hurried back down the stairs. The living room was empty, but the front door was now closed. We hadn't heard it shut. A sense of dread washed over me. Something wasn't right. "Let's find them and get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. We moved through the house, checking each room. The kitchen was empty, and so was the dining room. As we entered the last room, a small storage space at the back, we found Alex and Sam. They were standing still, staring at something on the floor. I followed their gaze and saw what they were looking at: a trapdoor. "Did you open it?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "It was already open when we got here." A cold draft came up from the trapdoor, sending shivers down my spine. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from our flashlight. Against my better judgment, we decided to go down. The narrow wooden ladder creaked as we descended into the basement. The basement was damp and cold. The walls were lined with shelves full of dusty jars and old tools. In the corner, there was a small flickering light. We cautiously approached it and found an old lantern hanging from a nail in the wall. It cast a dim glow, barely illuminating the room. Suddenly, we heard footsteps above us. Someone else was in the house. My heart pounded in my chest. We turned off our flashlights and stood still, listening. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer to the trapdoor. We held our breath, hoping whoever it was would leave, but the footsteps stopped right above us. Then slowly, the trapdoor began to creak open. A figure appeared at the top of the ladder, silhouetted against the dim light from the living room. It was a man, tall and thin, with wild hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. He climbed down the ladder, and we backed away, trying to stay out of his sight. The man moved slowly, methodically, as if searching for something. He muttered to himself, words we couldn't understand. I could feel my friends trembling beside me. We needed to get out, but the only way was past the man. Suddenly, the man stopped and turned his head, looking directly at us. His eyes locked onto mine, and a cold smile spread across his face. He started walking towards us, and panic set in. We bolted for the ladder, scrambling up as fast as we could. Alex went first, followed by Jenny, then me, and finally Sam. As we reached the top, the man grabbed Sam's ankle, pulling him back down. Sam kicked and struggled, and we all grabbed him, pulling with all our strength. Sam managed to break free, and we slammed the trapdoor shut, locking it with a rusty bolt. We didn't stop to catch our breath. We ran out of the house, through the front door, and back to the car. We jumped in, and Alex started the engine. The tires screeched as we sped away, not looking back. As we drove away, the house disappeared into the darkness behind us. We didn't speak, too shaken by what had just happened. The thrill of the night drive had turned into a nightmare. We had found our adventure, but it was one we would never want to repeat. From that night on, we never spoke of the abandoned house again. The memory of the man and his eerie smile haunted me for weeks. Even now, when I drive past the edge of town, I feel a chill and speed up, not wanting to be reminded of that terrifying night. Story 4. I worked a night shift at a quiet gas station. The job was simple: stocking shelves, cleaning, and handling the register. The nights were usually calm, with only a few customers stopping by to fill up their tanks or grab a snack. One evening, as I was preparing to close up, I noticed the air felt different. There was a strange stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. As the shift neared its end, an old car pulled up to the pump. Out stepped an elderly man, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. His white hair was neatly combed, and he moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He walked into the store, and I greeted him with a smile. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" I asked. He nodded politely, and walked around the store, browsing the shelves. I went back to my tasks, wiping down the counter and straightening the magazine. After a few minutes, he approached the counter with a small bottle of water and a pack of gum. "Will that be all?" I asked, ringing up his items. He nodded again, his eyes fixed on mine. Something was unsettling about his gaze, but I couldn't quite place it. As I handed him his change, he reached out and gripped my wrist. His touch was cold, and I felt a shiver run through me. "Hell is a real place," he said in a low, gravelly voice, "and the devil has already got his hand on you, girl. Be careful." I froze, staring at him, and his words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. He released my wrist, took his items, and walked out without another word. I watched him drive away, the tail lights of his car disappearing into the darkness. For a moment, I stood there, my heart pounding. His words echoed in my mind, sending chills down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling and went back to work, but the unease lingered. I finished my shift and locked up the store, but I couldn't stop thinking about the old man. His warning played over and over in my head, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What did he mean? Why did he say that to me? As I drove home, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the old man's car following. The night seemed darker than usual, and every shadow felt menacing. When I finally reached my apartment, I quickly locked the door and checked all the windows. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every creak and groan of the building made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The old man's warning haunted my dreams, and I woke up several times in a cold sweat. The next day, I told my coworker about the encounter. He laughed it off, saying the old man was probably just crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I felt a heavy weight on my chest, as if a dark cloud was hanging over me. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the old man's warning started to fade. Life went on as usual, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease every time I worked the night shift. One evening, as I was restocking the shelves, I heard a faint whisper. I turned around, but there was no one. I shrugged it off as my imagination and went back to work, but the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from all around me,
and I couldn't make out the words. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. I felt a chill in the air, and my heart started to race. I looked around the store, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. The lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one. My breath came in short gasps, and I felt a surge of panic. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with their insistent murmur. I ran to the front of the store and grabbed my phone, dialing my coworker's number with trembling fingers. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. I glanced at the clock. It was nearing the end of my shift. The memory of the old man's warning came rushing back, and a sense of terror gripped my heart. Just then, the door chime rang, and I turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was the old man, his eyes fixed on mine. He walked slowly towards me, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. "Hell is a real place," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. "And the devil has already got his hand on you, girl. Be careful." I backed away, my heart pounding. The old man's gaze was intense, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. He reached out and touched my wrist, his grip cold and unyielding. "Be careful," he repeated, his voice a whisper. I felt a surge of panic and pulled away, stumbling backward. The old man's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt a sense of impending doom. I turned and ran out of the store, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove home in a daze, the old man's warning echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, and I felt a heavy weight on my chest. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door and collapsed on the couch, my heart racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The old man's words haunted me, and I felt a sense of terror I couldn't explain. The next day, I called in sick and stayed home, too afraid to go back to work. I never saw the old man again, but his warning stayed with me. The memory of that night still sends chills down my spine, and I can't shake the feeling that something dark is watching me. I don't know if the old man was delusional, or if his warning was real, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night at the gas station.
Story 5. I'm John, and I enjoy taking my family on little adventures. We live in the city, so sometimes we like to escape to the countryside. One summer, I rented an old farmhouse online. It looked perfect. A big yard, old charm, and even a pool, a great spot to relax and unwind for a weekend. We arrived on a sunny afternoon. My wife, Julian, and our 2 kids, Liam and Zoe, were excited. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees. It had a wide porch with creaky wooden steps, and the inside was full of antique furniture and old pictures. It felt like stepping back in time. After unpacking, we decided to spend the evening by the pool. The kids splashed around, while Julian and I sat on the edge, dipping our feet in the cool water. The air was fresh, and the only sounds were the kids' laughter and the gentle rustling of leaves. As night fell, we set up some lights around the pool and had dinner outside. The stars were bright, and everything seemed perfect. But then I heard it, a crunching sound, like someone walking on dry leaves. I looked around, but it was dark beyond the reach of our lights. Julian noticed my concern. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "I'm sure it's just an animal," she replied, trying to sound calm, but the sounds continued, and they seemed to be getting closer. I told the kids to get out of the pool and go inside. We gathered our things quickly, and I locked the door behind us. Inside, the house felt safe, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I checked all the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. Julian and I put the kids to bed, and I kept a flashlight and my phone nearby. Hours passed, and the house was quiet. Just as I started to relax, there was a loud knock at the door. My heart jumped. I grabbed the flashlight and looked through the peephole. A man stood outside, wearing what looked like a police uniform. "Open up, it's the police," he called out. I hesitated. Why would the police be here at this hour? I decided to call out through the door. "Why are you here?" I asked. "There's been a report of suspicious activity. Please open the door." he replied. Something didn't feel right. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I decided to call the local police station to verify. As I dialed, the man outside knocked again, harder this time. "Open the door now," he shouted. The dispatcher at the police station answered, and I quickly explained the situation. They said they hadn't sent anyone to our location and advised me to stay inside and lock everything. They were sending real officers to our address. Fear gripped me. I told Julian to take the kids and hide in one of the bedrooms. I could hear the man outside trying the door handle. I went to the living room and turned off all the lights. Peeking through the curtains, more figures were moving around outside. Minutes felt like hours. As we waited, the knocking continued, and the man claimed to be the police, demanding we open the door. I knew he wasn't telling the truth. My phone buzzed. The real police were almost there. Suddenly, the fake officer started banging on the windows, trying to find a way in. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't break the glass. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car coming down the long driveway. The figures outside scattered into the woods. Real police officers arrived and checked the area. They found no sign of the imposters. They assured us we were safe, but suggested we find another place to stay for the night. They said it wasn't common, but sometimes people posed as officers to gain entry to homes. Their intentions were unknown, but it was clear they meant no good. We packed our bags and left the farmhouse, heading to a nearby hotel. The kids were scared but safe. Julian and I were shaken but relieved. As we drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if we had opened the door. It was a frightening experience that reminded me to always trust my instincts and verify before letting anyone in. We never found out who the fake police were or what they wanted, but we were thankful for the real officers who arrived just in time. That night changed the way I think about safety, and I'm more cautious now, especially when renting places in unfamiliar areas. Our little adventure turned into a night of terror, but we were lucky to come out of it unharmed. It was a lesson learned, and from then on, I made sure to always double-check everything and stay alert, no matter how safe a place seemed. It was a weekend evening, and I was feeling exhausted after a long week of work. I decided to go to bed early, hoping to catch up on some much-needed sleep. My small apartment was quiet, with only the occasional hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I closed my eyes and soon drifted off into a deep sleep. My dreams were vivid, filled with strange and unsettling images, but I couldn't wake up. It felt like I was trapped in my sleep, unable to move or open my eyes. When I finally woke up, it was still dark outside. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time. It was the early morning hours, around 3:30. I groggily sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. As I looked around the room, I noticed something that made my heart race. There was another bed in my room, right next to mine. I was sure it wasn't there when I went to sleep. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom unit, and there was no space for an extra bed. I blinked several times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the bed was still there. It was identical to mine, with white sheets and a dark wooden frame. But what terrified me was the figure lying in the bed. Someone was under the white sheet, completely still. The sheet was pulled up over their head, so I couldn't see their face. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stared at the figure. Who could it be? No one else had keys to my apartment, and I hadn't invited anyone over. I wanted to scream, but my voice seemed stuck in my throat. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. Should I call the police? I quietly got out of bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I tiptoed to the door. I reached for the light switch, but my hand trembled so much that I missed it the first time. When I finally turned on the light, the figure didn't move. The room was now brightly lit, and I could see the sheet. It looked old and worn, with small stains on it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I slowly walked over to the bed, my eyes never leaving the figure. As I got closer, I could see that the sheet was thin, almost transparent. I could make out the shape of the person's body underneath, but their face was still hidden. My hand shook as I reached out to touch the sheet. Just as my fingers brushed against the fabric, the figure moved. I jumped back, my heart racing. The figure sat up slowly, the sheet still covering them. They turned their head towards me, and I could feel their eyes on me. Even though I couldn't see them, I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure stood up, still wrapped in the sheet. They were tall, taller than anyone I knew. They took a step towards me, and I finally found my voice. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there silently, watching me. I backed away, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran towards the door, my hands fumbling with the lock. I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I finally managed to unlock the door and ran out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face. I leaned against the building, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning with questions. Who was that? How did they get into my apartment? I knew I couldn't go back in there alone, so I called the police. When the officers arrived, I explained what had happened. They looked at me with concern and asked me to wait outside while they checked the apartment. I paced back and forth, my heart still racing. After what felt like an eternity, the officers came back out. "There's no one in there," one of them said. "We checked every room. Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" I knew what I had seen, but I didn't argue. I thanked the officers and watched as they drove away. I stood there for a long time, staring up at my apartment window. Finally, I gathered the courage to go back inside. The extra bed was gone, and there was no sign of the figure. Everything was exactly as it had been before. I went to sleep. I checked all the doors and windows, but they were all. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that whoever or whatever had been in my room had vanished without a trace. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, sitting on the couch with all the lights on. The experience left me shaken, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened. I moved to a new apartment soon after, hoping to leave the memory behind. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel like someone is watching me, and I can't help but wonder if the figure in the white sheet will ever return. Story 7. I was working the graveyard shift at the gas station. The night was quiet, and I was halfway through my shift. The store was empty except for the hum of the refrigerators and the soft buzz of the overhead lights. I was stocking some shelves when I heard the chime of the door. A woman entered, holding a young boy's hand. They both looked scared. The woman's clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with tears. The boy clung to her side, his eyes wide with fear. She approached the counter, her voice shaky. "Can I use your phone?" I nodded and handed her the store phone. As she dialed, I noticed her hands trembling. The boy stayed close to her, looking around nervously. I couldn't imagine what they had been through. The woman spoke softly into the phone, her words rushed and urgent. I tried not to eavesdrop, but couldn't help catching fragments of her conversation. She was trying to reach someone for help. After the call, she asked if they could stay in the store for a while. I could see she was desperate. "Of course," I said. "You can stay as long as you need." I offered them some free drinks and snacks. The woman's face softened a bit, and she thanked. They sat in a corner, the boy munching on a candy bar while the woman sipped a bottle of water. I kept an eye on them, making sure they felt safe. The night dragged on, and the unease in my stomach grew. I didn't know what had happened to them, but it was clear they were running from something or someone. An hour passed. The door chimed again, this time more aggressively. A man stormed in, his face twisted with anger. "There you are," he shouted, making a beeline for the woman and the boy. The woman shrank back, pulling the boy closer. "Sir, you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I stepped between him and the woman. "Get out of my way," he roared. "She's coming with me." He tried to push past me, but I held my ground. The woman was crying now, clutching her son protectively. "Sir, I'm calling the police," I warned, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the phone. The man's eyes flashed with rage, and he lunged at me, knocking the phone out of my hand. It clattered to the floor, but I managed to grab it and dial 9. "Help! We need police at the gas station on Elm Street," I shouted into the phone. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way,
but it felt like an eternity before I heard the siren. The man continued to shout, trying to drag the woman out of the store. I stood in his way, hoping to buy time. The boy was crying now, his face buried in his mother's side. Finally, the police arrived. 2 officers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Step away from them," one officer commanded. The man hesitated, then raised his hands, his face still contorted with anger. The officers moved quickly, handcuffing him and escorting him out to the squad car. The woman collapsed onto a chair, sobbing with relief. The boy held on to her, still frightened, but visibly relieved that the man was gone. One of the officers stayed behind to talk to the woman. She explained that the man was her boyfriend and had been abusive. She had finally managed to escape with her son, seeking refuge in the gas station. The officer assured her that she was safe now and that they would help her find a place to stay. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The situation had been terrifying, but I was glad I could help. The woman thanked me repeatedly, tears of gratitude in her eyes. I told her it was no problem, just glad she and her son were safe. The police took the man away, and the officer stayed with the woman until a social worker arrived. They arranged for her and her son to stay at a safe house for the night. As they left, the woman turned to me one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. I nodded, watching as they walked out into the night, finally safe from harm. The store was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the lights. But the night felt different now. I had faced something terrifying and helped someone in need. The graveyard shift had never felt so important. As the hours passed and the morning light began to filter through the windows, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her son. I hoped they would find peace and safety in their new life, and I hoped that, in some small way, I had made a difference. The memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder of the strength it takes to stand up to fear and the power of kindness in the face of darkness. Story 8. I loved the thrill of stepping into the past, seeing the decay of what was once new, and feeling the history that lingered in the air. Some time ago, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned school in our town. The building had been empty for many years, and many stories surrounded it. People said it was haunted, and we wanted to see for ourselves if it was true. It was a night perfect for our adventure. We met up at my house and packed flashlights, snacks, and our phones. There were 4 of us: myself, Tom, Lisa, and Sarah. We were all excited and a little scared. As we walked to the school, we talked about the stories we had heard. Some people claimed they heard strange noises inside. Others said they saw shadows moving in the windows. When we reached the school, it looked even creepier than we imagined. The windows were broken, and the doors were boarded up. Vines had grown over the walls, and the paint was peeling off. The place looked like it belonged in a horror movie. We found a way in through a broken window at the back of the building. One by one, we climbed through, trying to be as quiet as possible. Once inside, we turned on our flashlights. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing dusty hallways and old lockers. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. We decided to stick together, not wanting to get lost in the maze of corridors. As we walked, our footsteps echoed loudly. Every sound seemed amplified in the empty building. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. We started in the main hallway, where the principal's office was. The door was ajar, and we pushed it open slowly. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, and the desk was overturned. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. I shivered, thinking about what could have caused such chaos. Next, we moved to the classroom. Each one was filled with old desks and chairs, some broken, and others covered in dust. Books were left open on the desks, their pages yellowed with age. It felt like the students had just left and never returned. In one classroom, we found a chalkboard with strange writing on it. The words were smeared and hard to read, but it looked like some kind of warning. Tom, always the brave one, laughed it off and said it was probably just kids playing a prank. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. As we continued exploring, we heard a loud bang from somewhere in the building. We all froze, our hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. We nodded, our eyes wide with fear. We decided to investigate, even though every instinct told me to leave. We followed the sound down a long, dark hallway. The walls were lined with old photos of students and teachers, their faces smiling and happy. It felt eerie, like they were watching us. At the end of the hallway, we reached the gymnasium. The doors were closed, but we could hear strange noises coming from inside. With a deep breath, Tom pushed the doors open. The gym was huge, and our flashlights barely lit up the far corners. We stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath our feet. In the middle of the gym, we saw something that made our blood run cold. A figure stood there, dressed in old tattered clothes. It was facing away from us, but we could see its shoulders rising and falling as if it were breathing heavily. We stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, the figure turned around and we saw its face. It was pale and gaunt, with dark sunken eyes. It looked right at us and let out a chilling scream. We ran. I don't remember how we got out of the gym or the building. All I remember is the pure terror that drove us to flee. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the school, panting and out of breath. We never went back to that school. The experience haunted us for a long time. We couldn't explain what we saw that night, and we didn't want to try. Our passion for exploring abandoned places was gone, replaced by the fear of what we might find. That night taught us that some places are better left alone. The abandoned school still stands, a silent reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the dark, and I, for one, am happy to leave it that way.